Data career advancement is like solving a complex puzzle, and we've got the missing pieces here for you. You can discover the essential skills and strategies to fast-track your career as a data leader now. Because today you're going to be meeting Daniel Smulevich, who's an EVP of Data at Jellyfish, a data leader who doesn't just talk data, but transforms it into real-world impact. So get ready to level up in your career. Thanks to Daniel. Coming up in this episode, the key to balancing hard and soft skills. We're going to do a deep dive into data team success. We're going to be discussing the importance of project management skills and scaling your data career to new heights. Now, Daniel, you oversee data and tech offerings with more than 200 people in your direct organization. From what you've learned there, what do you think are the biggest challenges that people in data face today?
It's the constant pace of having to react to the very next thing that happens. And data folks or data teams tend to realistically be at the mercy of one team or another. When I work with folks, you may see them sitting in marketing, sitting in IT, sitting in product and merchandising. Often even a mix of all of them, depending on the model with which the company works. So especially if you're in marketing, but also in IT these days, you'll always have every new platform, new tech. All your work may end up being on infrastructure and solving fixes and bugs. So your real challenge is extrapolating yourself from that process. And it's not easy. And realistically, you have to find allies in the different functions of the business if you want to be successful. And there's a funny cartoon by, the Marketoonist, and of Tom Fishburne, if your audience has heard of it. And really, there is a picture of a vignette of a CMO wearing or juggling 20, 30 hats and now being asked to also wear the Gen AI one. And that's really the crux of the problem. It's just not being distracted. To me, in my industry, we talked about 23 as the year of efficiency, as Mark Zuckerberg said. To me, now is the year of focus, because you're at risk of being distracted all the time by the latest Gen AI algo and not focusing on how to make production-ready changes when things are ready. It's really not being distracted by the idolatry of innovators that we have. Sometimes you're better off being the second rather than the first, being the apple as you come in and get the learnings.
Thanks, that's great. So Daniel, what advice would you give data leaders who have to manage large, distributed, global teams?
Accountability. And I think this is something that, tell you my journey, we grew massively in around 2019, 2020, literally just before the pandemic and at the very onset of it, I would say 20 to 21, still growth in headcount. And what we found is that as we expanded in markets at the same time as we expanded into headcount, we started developing a system of distributed accountabilities. And while in principle it worked really well, in practice it failed. Because when everyone can do it, no one will. So in principle, having areas where you look at being responsible for an area globally or as something you're passionate about, and then you come together as a committee to work in an environment where things move fast, just doesn't work. So if you had headwinds, like the industry has had for a few years, you have to nimble, agile, win in a zero-sum game from others. So what we have more and more done is making sure we were clear on the underlying goals and vision and provide quarterly and even more frequently updates, but effectively cascading those down, making sure that everyone knew what we wanted them to focus on. And I think there's an element, making sure the next layer would know how they can get the next layer themselves up to do the very same exercise.
Awesome. And what are your thoughts on using a product team success scorecard to align data team objectives with business objectives?
I'm thinking, as you were describing that, I could probably see a couple, the principle works, but I can see a couple of areas where I would push back or I would enhance it. And I guess the very first one is effectively as a data team, as I said at the start, we're the mercy of others in the sense that it shouldn't really be a scorecard initiated by a data team. It should cascade down from the overall business objectives or the stakeholders that we serve. Because after all, data without an action, it's just an enabler, right? We need someone to drive down the value, unless we're talking about small, specific, ad hoc exceptions where the data in itself is a monetizable revenue stream that you may be sending to a third party or so whatever that may be. Now, with that in mind, my pushback would be that it should be aligned to the objective of the stakeholder, and then eventually, as much as possible, quantify with the same metrics that the stakeholder is being assessed by. For instance, the way I look at it now these days in our team, at the end of the day, as we are in the advisory business, it is revenue. And then we have a series of levers, like a metrics tree, that we look at the levers that each area and team can put forward, and then eventually the role that different players, whether they are individual contributors or team leads, can play. What are the levers at their disposal? The other things we also frame is, as you know, effectively every metric ceases to be good, or every target ceases to be good when it becomes a target, or however it was said. I'm always bad at paraphrasing. I'm Italian. But you know that the problem is that whenever a metric becomes a target, eventually ceases to be useful. And that's the challenge, is any metric we may use, if you stretch it to the limit, you will always have negative outcomes in another area. So my goal is making sure that people understand what we're trying to drive, so that they put the boundaries in place. They don't ever compromise one for another. I'll make it practical. As you look at your data team or data department, you could arguably have a metric or in the scorecard which is about driving bugs down to zero or request or troubleshoot by just stopping to release anything. That you could do it. But if people understand in practice the eventual goal we're looking to contribute, and that is your starting point, then the scorecard becomes a nice way to see where the next problem is, but it is all in the mission of one single metric. So I'm a fan of starting from one metric.
I'd like to go back to the conversation about accountability and other skills for data people. What I'm interested in is how can they progress in their career to become data leaders?
I think the one thing that we must not forget, and especially I would say when you are in an advisory type of role, but not even just in that case, is that everyone wants a specialist, but eventually they may need a generalist. What do I mean with that? You have a problem at home, something breaks, maybe your pipe in your sink or whatever, you'd rather have a plumber rather than a general DIY person. But often, especially in data these days, to solve a complex problem, you need to be able to bring many talents and skills together. So arguably, maybe, yes, you need a plumber, but you probably also need an electrician. Maybe you need someone that had access to the blueprint, and so on and so on. I find there is a skill really in coordinating those talents and coming with narrow skill set, which is you should always continue to maintain and grow as you grow as a leader. That becomes your core foundation. You have an area in which you're a master in, but you broaden it up. Not necessarily as a T-shaped talent, as much as I like the V-shaped talent. And you will find that those are the areas that allow you to be the connector. The more you're a leader, the more you're connecting people, the more you're working on more complex problems that require multiple talent. I think project management skills are the most underrated soft skill I see in any environment. The most underrated soft skill in any team, in any environment. We often talk about storytelling without ever really defining what we talk about. We often talk about stakeholder management without really saying what that means. We talk about presentation. We talk about, again, being able to have good feedback and so on. We don't talk enough about project management. And again, I started as an individual contributor and I would manage a small project. Then I started managing clients, then portfolio of clients, markets, regions, entire global teams. And it always became about connecting different talents and skills to solve bigger and bigger problems. And even when I work directly on clients, still myself, I go back to the V-shaped talent. I still directly contribute and work on some of the most complex, or you could argue, I'd say most interesting type of opportunities, because we like solving problems. And then eventually, this is where you're again connecting folks. And really having that long-term vision is what makes you successful.
I'd also really love to get your thoughts while we're discussing this on how you build up teams to have confidence and accountability.
Good question. I would say probably one I would answer in multiple ways. So from a hiring perspective, some of the folks that I found to be the most valuable in my line of business, again, in the agency, the advisory consulting side, is people that showed aspects of the character that told me they were fairly self-sufficient, meaning that you could give them a problem and they would go and tackle it. Some people came from consultancies themselves, but it didn't necessarily correlate that much with that. It was mostly throughout the interview, you'd actually tend to give them tasks on areas, even that they didn't necessarily knew much about, but they knew enough they could research and get to that last mile. And that's showing you how people react. I'm more interested on how people learn. I think one of the best hires we made at the junior level back in time was someone who was quite open and said, but said, I learn really fast. Fantastic. Let's meet up again in 2 weeks. I give you this task, which I know you can't do right now. And I won't assess you on the quality you do. I'll assess you on the progress and how fast you've learned. And to me, those are some of the areas where you get people during that process a bit out of the comfort zone. There are things you can ask around how they stay up to date. What is their vision on the industry? Do they have a point of view? Those are the people that are trying, they're questioning themselves. And when you question yourself, when you're curious, finally you show potentially the attitude to build upon that. That's one area. The second I would say is not necessarily at a hiring level, but you learn by exposure and joy. I'll give you a practical example. I mentioned I love still being involved directly in projects. In the V-shaped talent, I think I would become less valuable if 2-3 years from now I actually stopped being directly involved in the delivery of something. What happens is that whenever I see something new or that the team may not have tackled before, I usually take it myself, do it, and towards the end start onboarding folks so they can run it moving forward. I have no interest in running the same type of project twice, or in some cases 3-5 times, depending on the type of thing. And I always try to get people to think the same way, thinking that to scale, to grow, you need to make yourself disposable. You need to make sure that someone else can now do the work for you. If you don't always think next, who is going to do it next? From the moment that you're delivering that project, if you don't have an exit plan, you'll struggle. So to me, having an exit plan on any given project engagement area is what actually gets you to progress really fast. And if you're the right type of person that thrives in challenges, you will work really well. Is try to find if people are working in very structured, hierarchical environment, they wouldn't work very well in my line of business, where we are paid to work with uncertainty someone that someone else couldn't solve. But I would argue that that's the problem any data person has. Because eventually there is this idea that data is a secret sauce that will suddenly you'll sprinkle on top of something, will add value no matter what. The reality can get data to tell any story. So the problem is more, what is the problem you're looking to solve? How do I impact with that data other teams that are going to have to do something with it? And if you can't work that one out, you're not going to be really successful one way or another. Or at least you'll hit a ceiling very soon.
So Daniel, as we wrap up today, is there any other advice to offer people who want to move up in organizations in data or take the next step to become data leaders?
Probably say, think of scale. Because so far we talked about how do you pass yourself to others. But I think, for instance, any company always look to either grow the revenue or cut costs, right? And effectively, you're in any cycle, whether you're a new feature, new tech, new product, new delivery areas, eventually every single one of them will go through a course where something is mature enough that the organization will expect to start making some savings so that they can invest in other areas, right? That's how progress works. And as you're working, you should identify ways to scale that, whether it's a use case that can be deployed in multiple areas, whether it's a way so that you can onboard cheaper, more junior resources to carry out the same task, whether it's something you can templatize for quality control and whatever that may be. And I think that obsession about scale is what helped me a lot as we moved from managing one team that we're all in the same office together to now we're in more markets than I have hair on my head. And that's kind of the way you think. If we didn't think about scale from the get-go every time and reassessed it, probably wouldn't have been able to do that. And that's what I would advise anyone.
So think of your career as a puzzle. And with our insights from Daniel today, you're ready to complete the puzzle and go to the next level. Now you can connect with Daniel on LinkedIn. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't miss this essential discussion with Bhavik Patel on what data teams can learn from product. And this episode was brought to you in partnership with our friends at Amplitude. So from me, Ross Webb, until next time, bye for now.